We're going to have a quick look at how to write an introduction to your essay. So introductions might seem easy, but they're actually quite tricky. And if you don't get them right, they can have a negative knock-on effect on the rest of your essay. So I'll go through what an introduction should be like, and then we'll have a look at some examples as well and see what works and what doesn't work about each one. The reason I want you to start working on this with me is so that you develop a sense in yourself of what makes a good introduction or not, so that when you apply that to your own work, you really can see how your intro is working, why it's working well, or what needs changing about it. So hopefully by the end of this lesson, you'll become what's called self-critical, which means you're able to critique your own ideas and your own writing and understand why it deserves a certain level. So the first example we're going to look at is from an essay I set about Alice in Wonderland. So all of these are actual introductions written by essays that I wrote the questions for. So this was quite a young class of students, so it's simpler language than you would expect at a higher level. We're going to look at the ideas and the way that the intro is constructed. In Alice in Wonderland, the caterpillar is an annoying character. Do you agree? So first, I want you to pause and think about this question. What kind of essay is it, and how would you personally answer it? So it doesn't matter whether you've read Alice in Wonderland or not. Just think about the kind of keywords in the question and the way that the question is phrased versus how you would be expected to answer that question. Hopefully you've figured out that it's a argumentative question because it says, do you agree here? So the idea of do you agree is asking you how far you agree, whether you think the caterpillar is annoying, isn't annoying, or is partly annoying, and why that might be, why the writer might have made that into, kind of woven that into the character of the caterpillar. So this is our introduction. Alice in Wonderland is a fantasy story about a little girl who had various encounters with different animal characters. One of the most annoying of these, however, was the caterpillar. So I want you to pause again and think about what is successful about that introduction, what's not so successful, and why. So you can compare your notes now with my own notes. What I think personally is good about this essay, the introduction of this essay, is that it focuses on the topic. So it's not just really general, it is focused on that question. It picks a side. You're really clearly given the fact that the student agrees with the question. So for an argumentative essay, that's the main thing you need to do in your introduction. You need to have something called a thesis, which gives you your line of argument. So even though it's not a developed thesis, that it's not that personal, you can see that there is a clear thesis or line of argument. One thing it does that's not so good, I'm not going to say bad because it's not terrible, but something that's not quite so good is the fact that it tells the story. You just don't need to do this, so you wouldn't drop marks for it, but there's no point. It wastes time and it makes your essay broader than it needs to be. The more focused your essay is on that question, the higher your marks go. So it tells the story a little bit too much. Instead of telling the story, it needs to explore the question a little bit more. Maybe start talking about how the character is annoying, or why he might be annoying, what reason the writer might have for making him annoying. I deliberately chose quite a funny sort of question to get students into the idea of essay writing without making it seem too formal. So this was one of the kind of introductory essay lessons that I teach to my younger students. So hopefully you figured some of that out yourself. If not, write down these notes so that you're getting used to the idea of what an introduction should look like. And we'll move on to the next question or the next example. So this is example 2, slightly down the page. This is a much higher level essay. So the first one was something like a year 8, year 7, year 8 essay. So students were maybe about 11 years old. This one's an A-level essay, student's 17. So it's not actually much longer, you'll notice. But when we actually look at the content, the ideas of what is written in that introduction, you should see a difference there. The question itself, you'll notice, is also a little bit harder. So just like with example 1, we'll have a look at the question, think about the question, and then look at the introduction and think about that in response to the question. Consider the significance of darkness and concealment in the play Macbeth. So I want you to pause and think about what type of question that is and how you need to write an introduction for it. So hopefully this time you understood that it's not argumentative, you're not picking a side, you're discussing, you're considering something, you're considering how important darkness and concealment are in the play. So how much of an influence do they have over the things that happen in the story? Why are they important? How are they important? These are the types of questions you should be answering in this kind of essay. So it's a discursive essay. We're not asking, do you think they're important? We're asking, what significance do they have? What role do they play in this play? So I'm going to read the answer now, and I want you to think again about things that are good and not so good about this introduction. Darkness and concealment are two themes that are particularly prominent in Shakespeare's Macbeth. Darkness and concealment place the play in the Gothic genre and are two fairly leading elements that have an effect on the events that occur in the play. So let's have a look at some things that are really good about it first. So it focuses entirely on the question. It's not about Macbeth. You don't really get to know what Macbeth's about in this introduction. It doesn't really go into the history of Macbeth. It just focuses completely on that idea of darkness and concealment. It's a very focused answer, very kind of dedicated to that topic. It uses specialist language. It uses language that is particular to English literature, that you only really use if you're talking about the subject of English literature. Themes, genre, Gothic, elements. Elements might be a bit broader, but in this case, quite a good specialist word that the student uses here. It calls the playwright by his second name only. So this is a bit more of an obscure one you might not have got. It's really important to do this. So in an examiner's mind, they have this kind of weird idea that if you called him William, you wouldn't be a very strong candidate. You wouldn't be a very strong student. Your answer wouldn't be that good. If you called him William Shakespeare, your answer would be okay. And if you call him Shakespeare only by his surname, then your answer sounds more like a proper essay. It kind of suggests that you've been taught proper essay style, and people that write in this way, when it comes to the names of writers or the names of critics, they end up higher up in the essay grading. So if you'd said particularly prominent in William's Macbeth, it would have stuck out like a sore thumb. William Shakespeare's Macbeth would have been okay, but Shakespeare's Macbeth is a really concise, a really condensed, accurate, and essay accurately kind of in keeping with essay style way to talk about this play, Shakespeare's Macbeth. Shows an awareness that the writer made it, it doesn't just exist by itself. And it shows an awareness of how to talk about writers within essays. It talks about genre. So genre is the kind of category that a text fits into. So it's aware of literature and different types of literature. In this case, a type of genre, so a type of category that it fits into. The Gothic genre in particular is something kind of interesting in relationship to these ideas of darkness and concealment. So it's something relevant to the question as well. So even though it's short, it's got a lot good about it, especially the fact that it's really focused, and especially the fact that it does answer this question and shows through only a few different words an awareness of essay style and essay elements, essay kind of the types of things that you would talk about in an essay, for example, element, genre, and calling the playwright by his second name. So, not exactly bad, not so good. What's not so good about this? Mainly it's short, too short. It needs to explore darkness a bit more and concealment a bit more. It needs to kind of give you a thesis as well. So it gives you a weak thesis that they are quite significant, fairly leading elements. This creates a kind of basic thesis, but it doesn't really give you anything more than that. So it needs a stronger thesis, essentially. It needs something stronger. So darkness and concealment are fairly significant, but not the most important part of Macbeth. Or darkness and concealment are totally what Macbeth is about. Something that is a strong personal response to that question. Finally, I'm going to have a look at something a little bit more modern. I'm going to look at an inspector calls, which almost all of the schools seem to be doing for GCSE last year when I was marking exams. I don't know why. I think it's easy to talk about the ideas, but the ideas are quite complex at the same time, so it's a good one to get to grips with. So this is a bit more of a complex question, but it's actually a lower level than that Macbeth question. Not considered as much of a difficult essay question to grapple with. Let's have a look at the question first. You can think about how you'll respond, and then we'll think about our answer, the introduction there. So it doesn't matter that you don't know any of these texts, by the way. It's just a kind of exercise in practicing essay style. So if you have no idea what Macbeth is, or an Inspector Calls, or Alice in Wonderland, it doesn't matter. It's just practicing the phrasing of the essay and the phrasing of the introduction. So example 3. Arthur Burling, who's one of the main characters, says, "If we were all responsible for everything that happened to everybody we had anything to do with, it would be very awkward, wouldn't it?" How does Priestley present ideas about responsibility in an Inspector Calls? So quite a tough question, quite a lot to it. I want you to think about how you'd answer that now and how you'd frame your introduction if you were writing this question. So hopefully you've figured out that it's a discursive essay, how does, and ideas about responsibility. So responsibility is your big idea, and you want to split that into different ways that this overall concept of responsibility is explored throughout the play. So it's not asking you to pick a side, it's just asking you to break apart this big idea, this big theme of responsibility, into smaller chunks and talk about each chunk in different paragraphs. So we have this idea of the quotation as well. Don't be put off by those. They're just kind of to guide your answer. They're to give you a bit of a kind of nudge in the right direction. They're not meant to be there to sort of freak out about or panic. So yeah, don't worry that it's got a quote. It doesn't make it any more complex to answer than something that didn't have a quote. So have a look at the introduction to this now. Priestley cleverly uses the contrasting personalities of all the characters in the Birling family, along with the socialist inspector, who is a mouthpiece for Priestley's view in the morality play. The inspector is seemingly the most responsible in his ideas, as we can see by the connotations of his speech as well as his judgment of the Birling family. He also offers supernatural themes to this otherwise normal play. Priestley sets the scene within the Birling household of a rich family who are very self-satisfied and somewhat ignorant, sitting at the table discussing future prospects with the family. So it's a little bit longer than the other two, so just pause for a little bit longer and take some time to think about what's good and not so good about this one. So hopefully you've thought about that, you've written a couple of notes down. Jump straight into what's really good about it. So it uses excellent essay style, essay vocabulary, specialist words and essay style. So words like mouthpiece. This is a really interesting concept where basically what he's saying is the character of the inspector is used to show the writer's opinion within the play. So he kind of stands in for Priestley, who wrote the play. Everything the inspector says is a reflection of what the writer thinks. So it's almost as if the writer is a character inside that play. It uses words like connotation, so it's not scared to use these big literary words, and it uses them correctly. Connotations of his speech. He uses the idea of themes. It talks about scene, so it's really focused on the fact that this is a play. It doesn't say sets the setting. So it doesn't feel like that they don't know that it's a play and it might be a novel. It's definitely a play, and he's talking about, or the student is talking about, elements of the play in particular. It has a very strong sense of the writer controlling the characters. A really strong sense of the writer controlling the characters. So Priestley, the writer, creates Birling and the inspector and the rest of the Birling family, and all of these are under his control, and they act and speak as he wants them to express certain ideas. That is a really important thing to understand about literature. So you've got this strong sense of the writer controlling the characters, and basically that means that you're aware of this extra level. You don't just think that they're all real, the characters, that they act and speak for themselves, because they don't. An awareness of that is what makes a distinction between a kind of B grade and an A-star grade. So if you're not showing an awareness of that level, the extra level that the writer works on, where he or she manipulates the characters, then you need to add that in to boost your grade. So that's very, very strong. Again, it kind of mentions genre as well, which is great. Morality play. So it knows exactly what type of play it is, not just that it's a play, but that it fits into a certain idea. Socialist also fits it within a certain context. So a few things now where it's not so good. The main thing is it really doesn't focus on the question. It's too rambling. So it doesn't focus on the question as much as it should. So it does say that the inspector is responsible in his ideas. It does use that word somewhere in the answer. But it's not all about responsibility. This question is screaming responsibility. That's your focus. That's your main thing that you need to get out of all of the words of the question. This idea of responsible or responsibility. So obviously the question wants you to just grapple with that in your answer. So talk about how some characters are responsible, some aren't, why that might be, who we like most as a character, and how that happens to correspond with the person who's also most responsible in the play. So the inspector is our favourite character, and he's also the most responsible. So probably the writer's telling us that we should be responsible and we should feel responsible and be mature with our ideas and our sense of duty to other people. So without getting a sense of that across in the introduction, it somewhat falls short of getting a top mark instantly without reading the rest of it. You can tell that it wouldn't quite be at that top level because it's not focused enough on that keyword. So even though example 2, if you can remember back to it, is not as developed as this one, it's actually a stronger candidate for getting a very high grade, and it did in fact get a very high grade, just because it entirely focuses on that question. So hopefully you can see how important it is to focus on the question, how to grapple with the ideas of the question in your introduction and in the rest of your essay, and what makes the difference between a not so good, a good, and a great essay introduction.